Well, new friends and old, welcome everybody. My name is Fiona Greenland, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this first session of the Culture and Contemporary Life series. It's actually the third year of the series, and this is an initiative of the culture section of the American Sociological Association. The series pressing issues of our time through a cultural lens and asks how cultural sociology can help us to think differently about those issues. So we have three brilliant panelists today, and their discussion will be moderated by our equally brilliant CCL committee member, Annie Hikito, who is an assistant professor of sociology at Colby College. Now, just before I turn things over to Annie, I want to go over a couple of nuts and bolts items. First, the session is being recorded, and it will be uploaded to the CCL YouTube channel afterwards. So if you know anybody who wasn't able to be here today and were afraid of missing out, just know that the recording will be available. Second, it would be really helpful if you could keep your microphones off throughout the discussion so that everybody has a really clear feed. And third, there will be a Q&A at the end of the discussion. If you want to participate in Q&A, please post your questions in the chat panel, and I'll be moderating those to bring into the discussion. So welcome, so glad to see you. Annie, over to you.
Many thanks to Fiona, my fellow organizers on the Committee for Cultural and Contemporary Life, our three brilliant panelists for being here, and all of you for being here. We're really excited to kick off this season of the series today. So as Fiona mentioned, I'm usually in Maine, but this year I come to you on Pacific time as a visiting scholar in gender and women's studies at UC Berkeley. And I thought I'd note before we begin that as I was developing this panel with the committee, I wanted to center authenticity because in addition to kind of being at the heart of my own work, I thought that contestations over what is real or genuine strike me as something at the heart of the modern world. And various social theorists, I think, would agree with me on that. I'm also a scholar of intersectionality, specifically race, class, gender, and nation. And I wanted to think about how claims to authenticity are linked to social inequalities, which also define the contemporary world as we know it. So the panelists today are experts on this, and they'll speak broadly to how cultural authenticity illuminates the social world today. So without further ado, I'll introduce them. First, we have Maria Sarita Gaetan, who is an associate professor of sociology and gender studies at the University of Utah. Dr. Gaetan writes and teaches in the areas of culture, globalization, Latinx studies, Latin American studies, gender and sexuality, and race and ethnicity. She is the recipient of paper awards from the Mexico section of the Latin American Studies Association, the Latino Sociology section of the American Sociological Association, and the National Association of Chicana and Chicano Studies. Her book, Tequila, Distilling the Spirit of Mexico, was published by Stanford University Press in 2014. Next, we have Sharon Zukin, who is Professor Emerita of Sociology and Earth and Environmental Sciences at Brooklyn College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. She has written several books about cities and culture, including Loft Living, The Cultures of Cities, and Naked City, The Death and Life of Authentic Urban Places. And her most recent book is The Innovation Complex, Cities, Tech, and the New Economy. Her book, Landscapes of Power, From Detroit to Disney World, won the C. Wright Mills Award. Naked City won the Jane Jacobs Urban Communication Book Award. And After the World Trade Center, edited with Michael Sorkin, was named one of the year's best books in architecture by the New York Times. She has also received the Lind Award for Career Achievement in Urban Sociology and been a visiting professor at the University of Amsterdam, Tongji University in Shanghai, and the University of Western Sydney. And finally, we have Fred Wary, who is currently the Townsend Martin Class of 1917 Professor of Sociology and an Associate Faculty Member of African American Studies at Princeton University. His abiding concerns with economic justice led him to found the Dignity Plus Debt Network, as well as the Debt Collection Lab. He is author, editor, or co-editor of 9 books, including Credit Where It's Due, Rethinking Financial Citizenship with Kristen C. Felt and Anthony Alvarez, The Oxford Handbook of Consumption with Ian Woodward, Money Talks with Nina Bandelj and Viviana Zelizer, and Measuring Culture with John Moore, Chris Bale, and others. He is the 2022-23 president of the Eastern Sociological Society and was the 2018 president of the Social Science History Association. In 2022, he was appointed to the Wealth Disparity Task Force by Governor Murphy. At Stanford University Press, he co-edits the book series Culture and Economic Life, and he is currently writing a book about debt relief. So as you can see, if you didn't know already, we have three very esteemed panelists, and we'll start going with the questions. So first of all, the first question is, how do you understand cultural authenticity? Why is it a key concept for understanding the contemporary world? And I think we'll start in order with Sarita, then Sharon, then Fred.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me here. I feel so honored to be in everybody's presence. And props to Annie and Fiona for making this all happen. So listen, I'm not going to be the first person to say this today, but authenticity is super tricky to define because it has so many different applications. Obviously contingent on context, time, place, and people. For me, authenticity is likely to involve, number one, questions around accuracy or conformity on the one hand, whether or not some of the classification is correct, right? So does it meet certain criteria? Does something meet certain criteria that most folks can agree on? Is it or isn't it Oaxacan mezcal? And this is what my colleagues Glenn Carroll and Dennis Wheaton might call type authenticity. So it's like in my head, this is how I think about it when I organize or start writing, number one. And number two, I think about, and I think this is how like maybe most folks, or perhaps I'm incorrect, but how I primarily think about authenticity involves, perhaps this is like more of the Trilling school or Trilling starting point, but is around sincerity, questions around sincerity, integrity, credibility, and consistency. Does one's actions align with values, their values? Does someone live according to their, is someone living their genuine life? Are they being their honest person? And here I'm thinking about like, are they being real to themselves? And this also, I think, implies connectedness, perhaps. And so then the final part, why is authenticity a key concept for understanding the contemporary world? I think it's important because it resonates in terms of recognition. It's a language, it's a type of word that it also clarifies hierarchies, right? It provides a sense of stability for folks. But I think part of what I've been thinking about most often is that it's so closely related, I think in this contemporary moment, and I think falsely, to ideas what people think is truth and goodness. And I'm just going to stop there and pass the baton.
Thank you. Sharon?
There's already great consensus among us sociologists, right? I can hardly add anything, but let me try. First of all, I have to emphasize the significance of looking at authenticity. To paraphrase Karl Marx, it seems as though people today have an authenticity fetish. You know, there is so much talk about authenticity, and for the past 15 years or so, it has been part of the foundational discourse in so many forms of cultural criticism and branding strategies as well. I mean, we can trace the migration of branding in the past 20 years, at least, from authenticity as a cultural construct applied to high cultural products like dramas and artworks and wine, to authenticity applied to personalities like politicians who can summon up tears. And this example from an advertisement in the New York Times that popped up on my phone the other day an advertisement from, of all organizations, Wells Fargo, that has been accused of numerous criminal types of financial machinations, how authentic leaders show up. And I'm just going to read one sentence. Being authentic means having the confidence to be vulnerable and transparent. Well, take that, Wells Fargo. Sarita has explored the multiple dimensions of authenticity as a valorization system, a system of establishing values, very nicely for us. But I want to emphasize that within the understanding and application of authenticity, we have so many contradictory concepts. We have authenticity applied to the self and authenticity applied to the group. We have authenticity applied to works of individual creative genius and authenticity applied to the products of primordial group, even tribal membership. We have authenticity applied to the true and the good, as Sarita suggested. And we have authenticity that we sociologists understand as a social construct that may be artfully arranged by decor and verbal and visual presentations. So I'll leave it at that, as authenticity as an ultimate system of values, but authenticity as very much a conflictual union of opposites.
Thank you, Sharon. And Fred?
So let me just first say that having this conversation with this particular group is a real joy. And I'll try not to be a killjoy as I sort of go off on my tangents of what authenticity might be versus what it is. And so when I'm thinking about what it might be, one of the things I start moving away from is type authenticity. It's very important type authenticity. It's really grounding, and it's a very useful distinction. And I always send students and colleagues to the Carolyn Wheaton 2008 to sort of like, that's a good piece to go to for thinking about authenticity. But I like to think also about sort of reactive sources of authenticity and transcendent sources. And so when I'm thinking about reactive sources, one of the things that happens when you're in a community and you've got creators in that community is that you may not be using the word authenticity until something's being taken away. And so in a moment of extraction, suddenly there becomes a lot of attention paid to the types of resources that you create and that you carry, and that now is being valued by outsiders and extracted, and often extracted in a disrespectful and violent way. And so that becomes one of those moments where authenticity really comes to the fore for populations who aren't hip, who don't really care about all the stuff, but they do care about having something that is valued for its own sake to be monetized in a way that it's disrespectful and then worse, stripped away. And I think the other thing that is easy to sort of let go of is, and again, people not necessarily using the word authentic, but in a lot of moments of transcendence, and sometimes we see this in religious communities, there is a sense that there is a real, and that there is something that needs to be protected, something that's, dare I say, sacred, and it's something worth fighting for, and sort of worth revering. And so as we think about sort of how authenticity shows up, but particularly since we often see it in terms of marketing, where the outsiders come in and they're like, okay, we're gonna mark this as authentic and make a great deal of money on it. There are also ways that incumbents and insiders are experiencing it, though they may not be using the words, and though sometimes they have to use the words in order to sort of let an outside audience know why they're doing what they're doing. And so that's kind of how I found myself dealing with this particular concept in a number of different ways.
Thank you so much, all of you. There's so much there for us to think about. We could probably have a more discussion on that, but we'll go on to the second question. So secondly, what are some ways that contestations over authenticity reveal power struggles? And this time we'll start with Sharon. You're on mute, Sharon. Oh, Sharon?
Oh, Sharon, you're on mute.
Muted. There we go. Okay,
Oh,
thank you.
There you go.
A lot of my work as an urbanist involves space mediated by authenticity and authenticity mediated by space. So that often I'm looking at outsiders, as Fred implied, outsiders looking at a space that they have not inhabited and defining it as authentic in order to appropriate its uses and its benefits. So that people who live in a working class neighborhood or in a community of color in cities often are described as living in an authentic neighborhood just at the moment of gentrification, right? Just before. And it's interesting to see how different kinds of people reach the authenticity plateau while others do not. I wrote a wonderful article with two wonderful graduate students a few years ago, looking at restaurant reviews on Yelp in two different Brooklyn neighborhoods that were being gentrified. One, a majority Black neighborhood, Bedford-Stuyvesant, and the other, a majority white neighborhood, Greenpoint. Of course, today, 5 years later, these are neighborhoods that have among the highest housing prices in New York City, but nonetheless. And restaurant reviews on the face of it have nothing to do with race or neighborhood context, and yet they do, because we found that a number of reviews of restaurants in the Black, predominantly Caribbean area of Bed-Stuy were connected with words of disgust and dirt and danger. Authenticity was barely mentioned and certainly not valued in reviews of that neighborhood's restaurants. But in reviews of restaurants in Greenpoint, which was predominantly a Polish immigrant neighborhood, people would go to the Polish restaurants and post reviews about the wonderful authenticity of Polish cuisine, which is a real joke to Poles who, historically ate potatoes as a poor country. So the contestations over authenticity in my work often reflect contestations over space and who can control neighborhood space, living space, business space, public space in cities.
Thank you. I will bounce to Fred now.
Oh, the discussion of how all of a sudden the cuisine, regardless of its content, becomes highly valued or not so highly valued. I think it's an important one because it helps us move beyond the content of what's being evaluated. And so one of the things that I found some years ago when doing some work on the Philadelphia barrio was that outsiders coming in, they saw danger before they ever got there. They saw dirt and disorder before they ever got there. And you would hear this as people were coming out of a gallery space and being surprised that there was that kind of thing happening in this kind of place, and they would more or less say it that way. And then also surprised that their car had not been broken into, though they parked on the street. And so there was this way in which even before they've entered the space, they've already predetermined what they're likely to see and how they're likely to feel in that space. And this sort of goes well with some of the Sampson and Rodenbush, some of the work they did on perceptions of disorder, where when you look at the demographics of a neighborhood, if you have high percentage Black and Latinx households and you're poor, then people will sort of overestimate the amount of trash on the streets and the number of broken windows compared to the actual counts of trash on the streets and broken windows. And so part of what we see in some of these neighborhood dynamics is that where you find inequality breeds more inequality of evaluation. And there's a sense that some of these communities, before they become highly valued and unaffordable, can be a little dangerous. And so one of the things that happens with authenticity too is that for certain kinds of people, dangerous part of the story, and it's sort of a kind of a spicy, authenticity. And so I think one of the things that we certainly should keep in mind is that we like to go well beyond the contents of place and the behaviors in those places to think about other factors that are prefiguring one's evaluative frame. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Fred. And Sarita?
I really appreciate this this conversation, this angle, and noting how folks don't have to actually use the word authenticity to have a conversation that is implicating authenticity politics. Something that I've been thinking about, and bear with me here because I don't know if I'm going to say this the right way. Again, this is about how authenticity I see as being aligned with dynamics, perhaps authenticity as ideology, around questions of worthiness, what is normal, and what is natural. And I think what I see as very urgent happening right now in contemporary society, and that is the coordinated attack that is happening across the country on trans communities. Here in Utah, in August, late August, so right as classes were started, a student athlete in high school was investigated over her gender after she placed first at an all-state competition because the parents of the second place and third place winner submitted a complaint questioning whether or not this student athlete was in fact assigned female at birth. I read this and the subsequent 2 anti-trans bills that have moved forward in Utah State legislature this week, targeting only the trans community, as tapping into beliefs about what is a real boy, man, what is real girl, woman. I think these expectations are likewise tethered to binary thinking and are enmeshed in even the binary ideas that authenticity finds itself tethered to. Not always, but authentic and inauthentic. And I'm not saying that these debates are solely related to authenticity, but I feel like it's worth our time to kind of think about how that operates. Because simultaneously, cis identity, wealth, is normalized. Poor people, people of color, trans people are paying the price every day being deemed unworthy, abnormal, and I would argue inauthentic. And I see this as a type of very both unsophisticated politic and sophisticated politic that the right has taken up very effectively. And I think it's urgent and people are dying. And I'm just gonna leave it there.
Thank you, Sarita, especially for bringing gender into the conversation. Fiona just sent me a chat message that was pointing that out too. A very sort of visceral way we can see a very contemporary example of how authenticity plays into ideas of politics and power through identity. And maybe we can come back to that in the Q&A because that's a really striking example you brought up, so thank you. Our next question, I'm a methodologist, so I always have to throw a methods question there, is what methods have you used to examine cultural authenticity? Are there other methods that would be useful to employ? And this time we'll start with Fred.
Oh, okay. So I think we all can, I mean, yeah, I think there's a way that we can open up the tent for the way we think about assess, detect, evaluate authenticity and its related concepts. When I think about how I found myself thinking about authenticity, it was through immersion and thick description. And so one of the things that happens when you're immersed in a place is that you get to see how people protect things, even when they don't have the means for protection. And in those ways, you start to understand that there's something that's valued, and they find ways to sort of express deep concerns about the thing that they value being mistreated. They also find ways to either get in the way of its mistreatment or to at least slow down those who are trying to increase the pace of that mistreatment. And you get to see that when you're kind of hanging out in the place. And I guess one of the first times I experienced this was some years ago. I was in a market in Thailand where there are lots of artisans around and they're doing their thing. And I'm asking, and I've been asking them all sorts of questions about how they got started and how did this marketplace emerge in this place, and they kind of looked at me and they said, "But we already told you that." And I said, "But no, I don't remember that part." And so no, we already told you that. We told you that we're the real one. And this is when I had to start dealing with this notion of what's real and what's fake. That was the real one, the real one. They're like, "Yeah, we're the real one." And then they would just walk off. And so one of the things that was getting harder and harder to figure out is what is it that they told me that I did not know that they told me. And what they had really basically told me was that they had previously occupied the space where this new market was, which was made to look older. And they were pushed back into their village and then they reestablished back in their village. And they were pushed back because they became the victims of their own success. And so a program that the government started as a way of keeping migrants from moving too much to the cities, and as a way of preserving local cultural traditions, because Thailand's very big on local cultural traditions and has a very strong set of policies towards cultural preservation. That went in a way that no one anticipated, because they thought this was going to be all subsistence, and then it sort of boomed. And as it boomed, they were displaced. But the new market took their village name, and so they had to sort of rename their market the Bantuai village on both sides of the little stream. And so it was one of these moments where had I not been sort of hanging around, and had they not just been telling me very and sort of very clipped language, "Oh, but we told you the answer, you're not paying attention," then I had to take the time to sort of figure out what I wasn't paying attention to. And so, and in this way, I think part of what happened for me is I started to understand how ethnographic immersion and thick description had to be paired with a sense of history for that community and for that country. And so there was something going on in the central government and in its history of avoiding colonization that meant that sort of their cultural policies were very strong. And there was a much more language, even at the local level, about what's real and what's ours, et cetera, as a way of marking distinctions with their neighbors, and particularly when those neighbors were themselves colonized and encroaching. And so that's one of the ways that I came towards thinking about the role that ethnography and qualitative interviewing and some small scale surveys plus history were very important for understanding the sites that I was in and for being the reason that I was thinking about authenticity in the first place. And so I'll leave it there.
Thank you. We'll go to Sarita next.
Hi. So, sorry, just a second. Sorry, my computer's old. I think that anyone can use, I think all types of methods are valid to examine authenticity. I'm a qualitative scholar. I've hung out at meetings, at regulatory meetings in Mexico. I've analyzed the content of artwork, of codices, of colonial documents, of bottle labels. I've analyzed the content of music lyrics, dance videos. I think part of what I've learned is that you can find information in unexpected places, and that listening is really valuable. I learned the most, I think, just from like talking to folks on buses and what other like non-academic people wanted to learn about in the instance of tequila. Like, why is it that Lucha Reyes is the queen of, why is she the tequilera? Why is she so recognized? And how come we don't see her? Why is she not anywhere, even though we all know her music? I'm like, I don't know, but everybody asked me. And so then I decided that's worth looking into. So I think that listening's good to everybody. And if it doesn't get into the book, or if it doesn't get into that one article, that maybe it'll get somewhere else eventually. So, yeah, so I'm just gonna leave it there. I don't have much to add other than that.
Okay, thanks, Sarita. And finally, Sharon.
I just want to underline what Fred and Sarita have already said. Really immersing yourself, really listening to what people say, what are people talking about, even when they're not using the word authenticity. What description can you write, which is which gives a sense of what people are worried about, what they see, what they feel, their sensory environment, their sensory habitus, and what they say about it. So that's, those are the things that I always try to pay attention to.
All right, thank you. I'm sort of laughing at myself because I'm an ethnographer, and I think I chose three very ethnographically oriented people for this panel. But I think I agree, like get just meaning making, and especially understanding something like authenticity and how it's constructed. Immersion is truly like one of the best ways to do that. Although I would still be open to hearing from perhaps quantitative scholars and others if they had ideas on it. So finally, our last question, and then we can jump into Q&A afterwards, is what directions would you like to see studies of cultural authenticity take in the future? And we'll start off with Sarita this time.
So I think I would really like to see more critical engagement around authenticity's significance as nearly always implicitly, or maybe Rather, it's universal understanding as a positive subject, like as its goodness, right? In other words, why is it implied as good or neutral? Because that's sociological in and of itself. Like when it rests there as uninterrogated, as being authentic is good, that's when I think it's more likely to be mobilized by dominant actors of all sorts, by institutions, by folks who might not have the best intentions. Another possible topic I'd like to see, and this is not my original take, but one that I think Daphne Dimitri and Balazs Kovacs, two brilliant scholars, have talked about, and that is, how do meanings of authenticity change over time? I think it's also one that's worthy of deeper thought.
Thanks, Larita. And we'll go to Sharon next.
I'm thinking about ways that authenticity has shaped my understanding of two projects that I'm working on now. One has to do with the rezoning of an area of Lower Manhattan, Soho, that 50 years ago was created by various actors as an artist's district and has been rezoned in the past 2 years to open the neighborhood to tall new buildings that contradict the remaining artists' sense of the history and reality of their neighborhood, and also historic preservation laws. Now, the political context of the rezoning has to do with the severe housing crisis in New York, as well as many other places in the world. But the meaning and the turning around and turning inside out of authenticity is really part and parcel of all of the conflicts that are still ongoing in this rezoning situation. And I'm working with a documentary filmmaker on a film project about the rezoning of Soho in light of the area's history and the housing crisis. So I'd like to see deeper work, more work, extending authenticity into what's happening now. And then the other project that I'm working on, at first I was going to say, oh, that doesn't have anything to do with authenticity, but it certainly does. And it's an application of authenticity to digital technology and the metaverse in many ways. I'm looking at the sneaker economy and NFTs and how they have become sites of financial speculation based on cultural, let's say the journey of a cultural commodity to become a financial asset. So, authenticity and scarcity are the two linchpins of both NFT markets and sneaker markets. So I'd like people to be aware of the significance of authenticity, even when authenticity might not be a specific part of the conversation.
Thanks, Sharon. Good points taken. And finally, Fred.
I guess I want to go into two different directions. I'm sure people are doing it. I'm just slow with keeping up with the literature. I'm waiting on another lead. So I guess one of those areas is a lot of the times when I hear people talking about the importance of authenticity, they're trying to make a claim on sort of solidarity and ritual joy, exploration that is not being directed by others. And so when they're thinking about real, they're thinking about sort of the joy that comes from letting go of what someone else says they need to do and sort of getting back to something that is that for them they could be sort of sincerely joyful about getting back to something or getting to the heart of something. And so I mean, I don't know why we don't do more on sort of the politics of authenticity and joy, particularly where that joy seems to work both in someone's interest and against it. And one of the other things that I wish that we did more work on, and this is probably due to the fact that I grew up in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and for anyone who doesn't know where that is, it's in York County. And so in a place like that, when people are thinking about authenticity, they're not using that word, but they are sort of really concerned about sort of their low level rituals of the football game and the time on the sort of certain porches that become very important and church life that seems to extend to all life for some folks. Choirs and people who can and cannot sing. And there's this whole thing about what it means to be country people, and not to and that's a very different world, or these small towns where the real estate market isn't taking off, and yet they want to preserve things that they think are really valuable about growing up in this small town, and they care about the old families, and so there's a lot of action that's happening, but because you don't have an overheated real estate market, and you don't have a bunch of academics sort of living nearby or wanting to live nearby, we don't write about it, and we don't have a sort of a focused attention towards it that I know of. And so those are areas where I would love to see more work. And I guess the last thing I'll say about sort of this question of where things might be going. I would also like to see us sort of try to figure out the authenticity and its opposites. And so, are there people who find comfort in the loss of a real that was never great for them? And so a lot of times we're thinking about sort of the authentic and the traditional and things that might be really beautiful. It might be really beautiful to look at, but you try living in it, depending on the particular body you inhabit, and the set of identities that you wish to claim. And so one of the things I think that we should think more carefully about are those who may be in communities that are well preserved, and who would rather that they be otherwise. And not really caring that much about which direction they go in. They just want something that's not what they're in now. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, all of you. Those are such compelling questions. And again, I'm so grateful that we're all here today because, as many of you said, authenticity and ideas are always operating, but they're not always named or recognized as such. So I hope this panel is going to put us in that direction. So we're going to wrap up this panel at what is 2 o'clock my time, 5 o'clock Eastern time. So we have a solid 14 minutes left for Q&A. I see we already have 2 in the chat, and I think I will just read them so we can absorb them, and it will also be on the recording. So the first question comes from Ann Taylor, and I'm just going to read straight from the text. She says, I have a question for Fred, but would love to hear from others. This question comes from my reflection on my work on tourism. In response to your comments about ethnographic immersion and thick description to help understand authenticity on a local level, I'm wondering what you think about finding a balance between criticism in analyses and leaving space for research subjects to tell you what they consider to be authentic, and just letting that be what it is. can we critique accounts of authenticity and study it at the same time without using our own criteria of, quote, authentic?
I guess this means I go first,
Sure.
or I could go. Oh, okay. Oh, and I may not have. Okay, so I'm going to give an answer, and if you disagree with the answer, feel free to discard the answer. Because I don't think my answers are answers on this, and this is why. Because I actually think that we have to offer up an analysis and a criticism, even when we take very seriously the positions of the people we study. I think it's disrespectful to do otherwise. It's dishonest. And I've been in the field and had people look me in the face and say, "I know you're thinking something," and I have to say, "Oh, I'm thinking that whatever I'm thinking is probably wrong anyway." And then by the time I finish with my wrapping myself into knots, they've moved on and they've gone on to the next topic. Because and this is and I'll give you an example of one of the ways that I think it becomes productive. So when I was working on the Philadelphia barrio, I remember I had sort of more or less drafted the thing. It was ready to go to press so that we could get it, the proofs, etc. And then we decided to hold a little session on a Saturday afternoon and invited people who were quoted in the book, and then people came who weren't quoted in the book. And I had said some things about sort of intra-group fighting in the community around questions of authenticity and cultural representation and balance. And some people wanted to take me to task for it. And the nice thing about that is that as soon as someone tried to take me to task, someone else got up and wanted to take them to task for taking me to task because they had a story. And then by the time that all played out, I was like, okay, there's my evidence that I wasn't completely off the mark here. But there were other moments where people thought that because I had described something I saw, it seemed to be unflattering in a community that had already been through so much criticism. And so my position then was, instead of taking it out, I'm just going to indicate this was something that people who read it in the community found to be problematic. And I'm just going to say it. I'm going to make sure it's somehow in the book that these are things that came up, not flattering portrayals. Overall in the chapter, you get I think a full portrayal, but the particular thing's not flattering. And there are ways, there are reasons why they should be upset about that. But I need to say what I saw, and I need to just be honest. And so my whole thing was, so long as I'm being kind of transparent, I can do both, and I think I need to do both. But there may, who knows? Maybe I crossed the line and people were just nice and let me go. I'm lucky that way, so I know that I've had quite a lot of luck in my life and sort of not been taken all the way to task from time to time. But I don't know. But that's the position I've taken.
Thank you. I don't know if Sarita or Sharon had anything to add with that, but we do have two really great questions also in the queue, and I want to make sure we give time to those. Did you have any extra thoughts on that question, Burning?
No, I just want to emphasize that what Fred says quite correctly is relevant to all kinds of studies. It's not specific to authenticity. You describe, you explain, you interpret the best you can, and of course your subjects will not all be satisfied. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. We have two more questions and they're kind of related, so I think I'll read them together and then the three panelists can give their thoughts. So the first comes from Daphne Dimitri, and she says, "Thank you to all these great panelists. It sounds like authenticity truly is everywhere and anywhere we look. How might this hurt or benefit the growth of authenticity as a subfield of study? Do we need a section of ASA on authenticity?" And relatedly, Zawadi Rux Ahidiana says, "It seems like authenticity is closely tied to belonging and exclusion, which appear in a number of sociological subfields. Can you each share how you're drawing on literatures outside of culture to address this aspect of authenticity? It would be helpful to know what other subfields and disciplines you're drawing on to enhance your work in culture."
I can comment a little bit. So I don't know to respond to Daphne's comment, I don't know if it hurts or benefits the growth of authenticity as a subfield. I'm always generally the more the merrier conversations, because there's always kind of like a surprising results when those, who knows what people are going to say, sparking new kind of possibilities. And do we need a section of the ASA now? I don't know either. I don't have an answer to that. Maybe other folks have ideas. So authenticity. So I'm moving down to the second question. I'll tell you what. I think that some of the sociology around race and ethnicity is really exciting. And I see a lot of it, I'm going to give mad props to the Journal of Race and Ethnicity, Sociology of Race and Ethnicity. Lots of great work coming out of there. I think lots of great energy coming from like scholars of color, where they're publishing all over the place, introducing really important work around like decolonial projects that are talk about questions of authenticity. I mean, they're like uplifting, like coming all over the place, like really introducing new ways of just thinking about even our field. So yeah, I would say race, ethnicity, like the decolonial work is coming, I think, out of social science and history, so maybe comparative historical methods. So many, I'm so excited about where and how, and again, maybe not all of it being anchored to the term authenticity, but it's definitely there. And I'm going to give a shout out to some of the work. I just read Dwana McKay's work on blood quantum and indigenous identities. I think that work is so superb. I do not know this scholar. Read Dwana McKay's work. Just read a little something. Does not have the word authenticity in it, but Fiona Greenland's work, fantastic. I read Annie Hikito's work. Oh my goodness. I mean, these scholars are like just, doing some great, amazing work. Deborah Vargas's work on Latinx identities and queerness and the claiming around, Fred was probably one of the only, well, I guess Sharon does too, but like around how communities utilize and speak back to the terms of their authenticity being mobilized from the outside, using Rasquachi aesthetics, her work around Jenny Rivera, and what it means to be a good citizen, and how the Latinx community is really kind of pushing back, and how that happens in these dark spaces. So there's all of this exciting work happening, not necessarily in the sociology of culture, but in all of these other spots, and it's just energizing.
I'd emphasize a few of the directions that Fred and Sarita suggested. The study of history. I mean, I'm not pointing to a particular school of thought, but the study of history is world forming, right? And idea forming. However and wherever it's presented, particularly studies of, as the question suggests, studies of exclusion and belonging. I'm watching a really tremendous documentary series in 4 parts by the great documentary filmmaker Raoul Peck, called "Exterminate All the Brutes." If you've read Heart of Darkness, you know where that line comes from. And Peck uses all kinds of artistic means to convey the brutality of colonial and imperialistic exploitation, extermination, annihilation, appropriation. Appropriation is a much milder term on that spectrum, and again the mediation of of space by authenticity and of authenticities by space, where indigenous populations are expelled from the areas where they had settled. So I would encourage everybody to take inspiration from everywhere, especially the study of histories.
Thank you so much. These are really, really great comments. And again, thank you to all the panelists, Fiona and the rest of the committee members, and everyone for being here. I see that we have a few more questions in the chat that are really provocative, but we are out of time, I believe. So I invite anyone else in the audience to correspond with the panelists or myself or other committee members. We would love to keep this conversation going. But we are going to wrap up. And so with a final thank you, I'll note that our second session is going to be next February. I believe the date is still to be determined, but the topic will be belligerent nationalism in big power politics. So we look forward to seeing all you there. One more thank you to everyone and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Annie. Great to see you all. Sarita, Sharon, and Fred. Many thanks from the culture section. Bye, everybody. See you next time.